like everyone's an expert at something. That is kind of a core principle, I think, of side hustling. Everyone's an expert at something, and it could be like some video game, it could be knitting, it could be some hobby that is very esoteric or random, but your friends always ask you about it, or like you're really good at, I don't know, getting out of traffic tickets, or like a lot of successful side hustles are these really random kind of things, like things that people haven't even thought about and end up being like 6-figure businesses.
What's up, everybody? I'm Chris Ronzio, founder and CEO of Trainual, and this is Process Makes Perfect. As always, we're talking with experts in process creation, automation, and delegation, basically the people that know how to make business easier. You just heard Chris Guillebeau, and this episode is all about the process of creating a side hustle. Chris is the New York Times bestselling author of The $100 Startup, Side Hustle, The Happiness of Pursuit, Born for This, and his newest book, which comes out in April, called The Money Tree. During a lifetime of self-employment that included 4 years as a volunteer aide in West Africa, he visited every country in the world before his 35th birthday. That's 193 countries. He's the host of the Side Hustle School podcast, which is a daily podcast downloaded more than 2 million times a month. And I've gone to his events, the World Domination Summit. I've read his books, and this guy has been hugely influential for me. So I think you're going to love this. What I really liked about this episode is that Chris takes us behind the scenes on the podcast, on the events, and on his process of making books that have turned him into the thought leader that he is. And he'll share tips on how to develop your own side hustle. When he was getting started, he had to cobble together that income to afford him the ability to travel around the world. So whether you work for a company or you're trying to start your own, I think you'll find his tips really helpful, and the process to get started is in this podcast. I hope you enjoy it.
Can this business thrive without the owner?
You got to start putting systems and processes in place. If you don't use the systems, the business will break.
We're always looking to buy back our time.
You cannot say something once and expect that it actually is received.
This is the way we work.
A big motivation in that for me is creating a job for myself that I really enjoy.
This is how you discover your vision.
And this is Process Makes Perfect. Welcome to Process Makes Perfect. I'm your host, Chris Ronzio, and as you heard in the intro, today we're talking with Chris Guillebeau. Chris, thank you so much. Welcome.
Chris, thank you so much. It's a big honor.
This is easy, Chris and Chris.
Exactly.
I won't mess this up. So today we're going to talk through a few things. We focus on process in this podcast. So we're going to talk about the process of building side hustles, which I think could be more important than ever right now, and the process of building communities, which is also probably more important than ever. So I don't know if you want to give us a brief background or if we should just dive right into it. Why don't I start? The first thing I ever read of yours was a manifesto you created called A Brief Guide to World Domination, which is the best name ever, I would say.
Yeah, very modest title.
So I picture it being like a Jerry Maguire kind of moment where late at night you pounded out this whole manifesto. What was the actual story? What was the inspiration?
Yeah. Man, I love talking about process. I am excited about process. Like I had this project of going to every country in the world, which is kind of connected to the Brief Guide to World Domination. And for me, like I spent 11 years doing that, like trying to visit every country in the world, which I did. And it was all about process. Like it was like I was, I had to love the process. I think if anybody did it and didn't love the process, that'd be very difficult, So I've been thinking about that for a long time. And with Brief Guide to World Domination, the process for that was like, well, I think I have something to share. This is going back 11 years now. I think I have something to share. I've been an aid worker for 4 years. I've got this quest to go to every country. I've been an entrepreneur. But what is my message, basically? And so started crafting like all these notes about, what became The Art of Nonconformity, my original blog under the tagline of you don't have to live your life the way others expect. And so the Brief Guide to World Domination was kind of like a compilation of like some of my experiences, some other people's experiences around that time, and just kind of offering a different way to see the world. And that it's cool that you read that, because that is, like I said, going back quite a ways. But it's what allowed me to kind of start doing what I'm doing now.
So when you think about the process of visiting every country, and as you were writing that book, you were an aid worker. How'd you afford to visit every country? What were the logistics that
Absolutely.
you did?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've written quite a bit about this. I did a whole book called The Happiness of Pursuit, which was, a little bit of memoir of my journey in Quest, but also like the global story of Quests. Like, why do people do that? And, what do they learn? What do they sacrifice and such? But to try to give you like a direct, concise answer. So the first 100 countries cost about $30,000. And when I realized,
that's it.
Yeah, exactly. That was my response. Like when I actually realized, I was an aid worker for a while. Like I said, 4 years in West Africa. I just kind of naturally had traveled to like 30 countries by the time I was like 25 or so. And so I started by like setting a goal of going to 100 countries. And that's when I added up the difference between what I had been to them and like 100. I was like, it's got to be like $30,000. And I was like, man, people, like I wrote about this too, like people are buying SUVs, back home, at the time that cost $30,000 easily. And cool. Like nothing, I'm not saying people shouldn't buy a nice car or whatever, but for me, I was like the value of, being able to go to 100 countries, like that's, immense. And so after 100 countries, then I was like, let's go to every country in the world. And at that point, I kind of had a career, attached to it. I was writing books. I was doing little businesses and such. I don't know the exact cost for the final 100. It was more than 30,000, I'm sure. But it's not like an astronomical amount of money. The biggest challenge was not money. It was logistics, basically. It was process, essentially.
Yeah, and the first thing you said on here was, when you have these big goals, you've got to love the process if you're going to accomplish those things. So
that's right.
So you must have loved it. So did you have side gigs or side hustles through that to be able to fund your travels?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's go back. So let's like age 19 to 27. Basically, I never had a job. Like I was always working outside the formal economy. I learned to sell stuff on online auctions when those first came out. eBay.com was this cool new site, back in 1999, basically. And I, started by selling stuff around my apartment. And I learned to like buy coffee and Lego and video games and other stuff and resell it. And it's not like I was getting rich, but it was really exciting because I was like, wow, I'm 19 years old. And like, the last job I had was paying $8 an hour and I'm making like $15 an hour without even knowing what I'm doing, And like, if I get better at this, I'll make more, but not just so I can make more money. It's like, this is the key to freedom. Like, this is the key to like a life that I want to live of my own. So, from there, I learned about a lot of like internet marketing stuff and like building websites and affiliate income and Google AdSense and information products and all this stuff that eventually kind of like coalesced into, okay, I'm going to write a blog and go to every country in the world. And I want to write books. And that was my ambition at that point, like age 30. I had, came back to the States from being overseas and did grad school and was like, okay, what's next? And I had the choice to either do a PhD program or, kind of go all in with the blog. And I'm so glad that I was actually rejected from most of the PhD programs I applied to. And I cannot imagine an alternate reality in which like I was accepted and I went. I'm really, really glad for that.
So, all right. So you built this business and this life for yourself, writing and doing your blog, and you had other businesses too, like the travel cartel. And was that all during the same time?
Yeah, it's all a little bit kind of like, mixed together. Like that membership site, Travel Hacking Cartel. I started that. I don't remember exactly the year, but it was after I had been blogging. And I did that for like 5 years. We eventually just kind of like retired it, sunsetted it. And I had lots of little projects. I had a business called Unconventional Guides. It was like information publishing and such. And I was never good at like scaling a business. I was never good at like this whole like model of, creating a SaaS or whatever. Like for me, it was very much like, how can I create a lifestyle that allows me to do what's important to me and contribute meaningfully and not be dependent, on anyone else for my income and my well-being. And then like right now, obviously, like people are asking themselves, like, how can I not be dependent on a corporation, on the government, on like, I have to be able to provide for myself. Even if you have a job, even if you have a good job, that's cool. Like, it's fine. But like, what if you didn't have that job? What if next year you don't love that job anymore? What if something changes? Right. So like, I was very attracted to that value of self-reliance. And for me, it was like, how can I really, express that and then hopefully pass it on in some way to others?
Do you think that everyone could have a side hustle, or is there something innate that people need in order to pull it off?
I don't think there's anything innate about it, man. I think like, I used to live in West Africa, and like every person in the world there, every person in the country has a side hustle. Like you can't live in lots of countries in the world. without doing something to make your own way, because there's not much of a formal economy. There's not like LinkedIn, in the village in Sierra Leone or whatever. So no, I would never say it's easy. I never want to be like, this is the get rich quick plan or anything at all like that. But do I believe that everybody has something within themselves that they can offer to someone else, and can they learn the very basic business skills of creating a product or a service? Yes, of course. And not only can they, but I think most people probably should.
So since this is a process show, I've gotten asked those questions too from people that say, I want to start something. I don't know what to start. What would be the step-by-step sequence that you would tell that person to figure out how to make money for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, so it's usually like a little bit of a back and forth interview, right? And so we can't obviously interview every single listener, who's part of this conversation. But what I would say, like the first thing I would say to them is, okay, well, let's talk a bit about your skill set, which is quite different from saying like, what are you passionate about? Like, what do you like to? I don't usually start with that. It's like, what are you good at? And some people, have an answer for that. Other people are like, well, I don't actually know what I'm good at in terms of, making money or in terms of being marketable. And so then you have to unpack it a little bit, because I think some people think I'm only good at something for my career. Like I was trained in this kind of engineering or this kind of software development or firefighting or, whatever it was, but I don't know how to like take this skill and apply it in the new economy. And that's essentially what I'm trying to help people do is like, okay, so you've got your education, you've got your work experience, you've got the things that you're an expert in. Like everyone's an expert at something. That is kind of a core principle, I think, of side hustling. Everyone's an expert at something. And it could be like some video game, it could be knitting, it could be some hobby that is very esoteric or random, but your friends always ask you about it, or like you're really good at, getting out of traffic tickets, or a lot of successful side hustles are these really random kind of things, like things that people haven't even thought about and end up being like 6-figure businesses. So then it's like, how can we go from your skill set to your idea, and then from your idea to an offer, because everybody has ideas. If you ask the average person on the street, like, do you have a business idea? Oh yeah, I got this idea, but nothing's happening with it. And so I'm trying to help people like, what is your product? What is your service? Like, how is this idea offered to the world? How can I, as a consumer, give you money for it? Where do I go to do that? What's your Venmo, your PayPal, your website, your shopping cart? But so I'm trying to get people like nuts and bolts. So I think it starts with that skills, idea, offer, product, service, then launch.
Nice. So I remember another book of yours I read was The $100 Startup, which was kind of like the playbook for this, right? So if people are going through that, didn't it have kind of the sheets that you could fill out to craft your offer?
Yeah, that was a very how-to driven book, and also Side Hustle, from idea to income in 27 days. That's a very process-driven book, which is good. And like, I'm a process-oriented person, as we said. I just have learned a little bit, like the new book, The Money Tree, is a story. And I'm trying to teach through the story, so there is still a process there, but it's not presented in a didactic form. It's not like step 1, do this, step 2, do this. I think in some ways, we actually learn more from stories, and we retain more information from stories. So you actually might learn more from reading that than you would from reading the checklist or whatever. And like, I like both, of course. But if I think back about think about songs that you heard as a kid, you can sometimes remember the entire lyrics, to these songs, right? Because it's something that's different than just like a how-to, process driven thing.
Gangster's Paradise by Coolio.
Yeah, right. Living most our lives, right? And then also the what's the other parody of it, right? I forget that one. Amish Paradise. That's right.
Yeah. Weird Al. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so as the side hustle expert, you also have a podcast called Side Hustle School. So how long have you been doing the podcast for?
I have been doing it for 1,153 days, approximately.
Crazy.
I started at January 1, 2017. Been doing it every single day since then. And every day for the first 3 years, every day I told a different story. It was all case study model. It was extremely processed. It was like, this is this person. This is Chris over here from so-and-so. And like, here was his idea, and here's how he made it happen. Here's what tripped him up a little bit. Here's what he got wrong. Here's what he got right. Here was the outcome. 10 minutes a day, like really short, because trying to make it for, busy people, right? Busy people who actually have jobs and don't have time to listen to like super long stuff, all the time. And now I'm still doing 2 stories a week, but the rest of the time I'm doing like question and answer from listeners who are launching their projects. So it's really cool because I committed to doing it for a year and then just kind of kept going because now a lot of the stories on the program are coming from listeners who've been listening in like year 1, year 2, and like they have started their project. And so that's really fun. I like that.
Yeah, and the format's different too because you're reading these stories. So it's not necessarily an interview format. It's more curated and it's easy to listen to, which I like. So definitely check out the podcast if you haven't already. Now, in this kind of COVID-19 era that we're living in, that we're recording this in, what do side hustles look like today? Is there any recommendation you're making?
My recommendation is to embrace the uncertainty and to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And, if this sounds like too philosophical, like I assure you it's very practical. Like it's meant to actually be like very, like, how can I apply, what's happening essentially. And so I always have to be careful when I talk about this because I want to just say, like, I'm not, making light of something that is extremely disruptive and obviously damaging, right? So that's that, but it's not like I'm saying there's a silver lining. It's more like also, in addition to like the destruction and the disruption, systems are being changed. All kinds of people are working from home who have never done that before. I hear from a lot of people that like have wanted to work remotely. And their bosses always said no, or whatever. And like now here's their chance, and people are also having to like learn new habits and new rituals and new routine. I'm hearing from a lot of people that are actually like, I'm actually working on my side hustle during the day now. I wasn't able to do that before or whatever. So I think, there's always like winners and losers in the marketplace for, anything. Like the most obvious thing is like, don't you wish you could go back in time and like start that hand sanitizer company that you dreamed of as a kid? But to like that's super like, obvious, but also like people are looking for security. They're looking for assurance, they are looking for community. Like you mentioned that at the beginning, like, I think actually now more than ever, people need community because like we're stuck in different places and we're taught to kind of be afraid of people. Like that's not what it's said, but that's kind of what's implied. And so it's disturbing to the psyche. It's disturbing to like society. But hopefully, out of it will also come a lot of stories of people that are like, never would have done this if it hadn't been for this. Because I get a lot of that stuff. Like in $100 Startup, like the whole book begins with this guy who's like opened this mattress store and he was retired, or he was a laid off advertising executive and had been doing advertising for 20 years. And now he's like this entrepreneur. It's actually a 7-figure business now. Wow. And he said, I never would have imagined in a million years I was going to open like a retail store, but I kind of got pushed and that led to something different. So
that's amazing. Well, even in the uncertainty right now, I saw a story that's I think local to you. Are you in the Portland area? Is that right?
Most of the time.
So there's a distillery I think in the Portland area that started making hand sanitizer. Did you hear about that?
Oh, I did actually. Yeah. And I was like, they already have a good business model now without doing that, during this time,
right?
Just making the gin or whatever. But yes, that's pretty cool. I did see that.
Yeah. And so the exposure that they're getting, the press is almost like another kind of currency that, you can build. Yeah. So that's kind of a good shift, I guess, into community building. You started this whole journey, you said 11, 12 years ago, and you've built an amazing following and published books, and you've got this World Domination Summit that you've put on every summer, right? And there is an incredible community behind you. So do you think it was right place, right time that you started the thing, or do you think it's something anyone can do even today?
I think there's always the right place and right time element to any success. I think anybody who says like 100%, I built everything myself, you're like, well, you probably had some good, you had some good chances as well. But it doesn't mean that they don't work. It's like the whole thing about luck is like, to be luckier, take more chances, right? To be more fortunate, like more, swings at the bat or whatever. But so I'm sure there's like timing to it. But for me, it was, I do believe that now more than ever, people are looking for connection. Now more than ever, it's e-commerce is like widespread. Like it's not just mainstream, it's everywhere. It was a lot more unusual when I started doing stuff 20 years ago. Everybody has a PayPal or a Venmo account. If you walk into every coffee shop, like, there's like a lot of people there just kind of working on their side hustle, which was also, everybody thought you were on drugs or like you were selling drugs or like porn. Like they thought there was only 2 internet industries that existed like 20 years ago. It felt kind of shady about it actually. And now it's like everybody does it. So I think there's always times when one thing is easier and one thing is harder, but so those specific things change over time. But the chance to put forward a message and connect with people, like that's always there.
Yeah. Well, like you said, people could embrace this. You know, this is a time where I'm seeing a lot of virtual events popping up. So it's even easier to do those types of events. So make it happen, I guess. All right. So I guess to wrap this up, you've got a new book did it just come out or it's coming out, The Money Tree?
Yeah. Well, it depends on when people are listening to this. Publication date is April 7th. It's called The Money Tree, a story about finding the fortune in your own backyard.
I love it. And what can people expect to get out of that book?
Well, they can expect, first of all, to enjoy the story. It's a story of this young guy who, has a good job and is a hard worker, but has a lot of student loan debt, like so many people these days. And he's it's actually affecting his entire life. Like he has a lot of debt. He's getting kicked out of his apartment. It's affecting his relationship, all that kind of stuff. And he realizes that he can't just work harder. He can't just he's already doing a good job. He can't just start driving for Uber. That's not going to solve his problem. He has to do something different. And so he goes on this exploration of first learning to resell stuff like his college textbooks. And he gets a $1,000 challenge. Like somebody's like, can you make $1,000 in the next week? And he's like, well, if I knew how to do that, I wouldn't be in this problem. And they're like, well, just try. And so he kind of has to work that out. And then he starts a service business and, a lot of different stuff happens along the way. But I think they're going to learn through that process. They're going to learn like there is something that I can do. And my hope is always like with all my books, whether it's the how-to books or like this book, is that people will finish the book and not just say like, oh, that was a cool book. Like that's nice to hear, but I'd rather hear like, oh, this is a good book. And it got me thinking about something. And then I went and got online and started my thing or, I don't know, whatever it is, like it helped them take action. That's what I hope it will help.
Absolutely. Well, your books have done that for me. So I'll say thank you on behalf of all the listeners. It's funny, that $100 startup book, I already mentioned it, but a friend and I actually booked a hotel room, read the book, and started a business that night. And we had a sale within 8 hours, which was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Congratulations, Chris.
That was back in the day, and you tweeted me back. So you've had an influence on me. So thank you.
So glad to hear that, man. That's awesome.
So as we wrap this up, we do this thing called the double tap. Like if we were to just double click, double tap on you, a couple questions, rapid fire, just tell me whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
All right. So first, what is a brand that you think has perfected its process that you admire?
I was just hanging out with Donald Miller, who's the CEO of Story Brand. He's also an author, and he's just done an amazing job with helping businesses reduce confusion, which is a huge problem. So Story Brand, he's like super invested in process and logistics, and I just so good. I'm just so admiring of him. Story Brand.
Who is someone who's coached or mentored you?
I'm not super into mentorship, but it doesn't mean I haven't learned from people.
Interesting.
No, yeah. I mean, I think everybody has the power within themselves to learn stuff, and but it doesn't mean it's not to say that you haven't learned from people, right? It's just kind of like a nuanced thing. So Jonathan Fields is a good friend of mine. I learn from him all the time. He's the founder of Good Life Project, which is also a very popular podcast, and he's got this new personality test called Sparketypes. And I learn from him all the time. But I also want to say I learn from my community. I learn from just all the people out there that are tweeting or sending emails. That's what I've always tried to be focused on them as opposed to focused on who is above me or next to me or anything like that.
I love that. Okay. Your favorite book or podcast other than all of your own?
I'm giving all these long form answers to your quick questions. Sorry, I need to pick it up here, Podcast, I like Reply All. I like Happier with Gretchen Rubin. I'm going to go with those two. Reply All, Happier with Gretchen Rubin.
Great. Most entertaining person you follow online?
Most entertaining person. Okay. Who is really good with stuff? John Acuff. He does a great job.
And one app you can't live without?
OmniFocus. I'm going to go with OmniFocus. I use that for all my tasks, and it's actually open in another window while we're talking here. It's when I finish this conversation, here's what I'm going to do next. All my projects, all my tasks, got to use that.
Focused. All right. So everybody that didn't know you before this now knows that you're focused, you're process oriented, you built a community, you've written dozens of books probably.
Not dozens yet, but
soon to be dozens. But is there anything else you want to leave people with other than to go buy The Money Tree?
No, that's great. Wonderful conversation. Check out The Money Tree. Let me know what you think. If I can help with anything, just give a shot.
Amazing. Chris, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey, thanks for listening to Process Makes Perfect. If you're watching on YouTube, we do have an audio version available everywhere you listen to your podcast, so be sure to check that out. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and be sure to subscribe to the channel here. And we'd love if you would tell a few friends or family or anyone you think that could benefit from this. You can find me on social media anywhere at Chris Ronzio or the company Trainual. That's Train UAL, like a training manual, at Trainual, anywhere you want to follow us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.